All right, welcome back to Developer Roadmaps. So, you figured out how to store data in PHP, which is great, but now for the really fun part, making that data actually do something. Today, we're diving right into the brains of the operation: conditionals, loops, and functions. Let's get into it.
So far, we've covered the what, how we can hold on to information, whether it's a single piece of data in a variable or a whole bunch of things in an array.
But let's be real, data that just sits there is pretty useless. The magic happens when we give our code a brain, a way to make decisions, to repeat actions, and to keep itself organized. And that's exactly what we're talking about today: the 3 pillars that turn static data into a living, breathing application.
First things first, we need to teach our code how to think, and that really just means making decisions. In programming, we do this with something called conditionals. They're what let our application look at the data it has and choose which path to go down. The absolute classic here is the if, Elseif, and else structure. Seriously, just think about it in plain English. If it's raining, I'll take an umbrella. Otherwise, if it's sunny, I'll wear sunglasses. And if it's neither of those, well, I'll just go outside. It's that simple branching logic that lets your app actually react to things.
Okay, but what happens when you have more than just 2 paths? When your code could go in a bunch of different directions? For years, developers used what's called a switch statement for this. But modern PHP gives us a much cleaner, much better tool called match. It's just more precise, it helps you avoid a lot of common mistakes, and frankly, it just makes your code a lot easier to read when you're choosing between several options.
Modern PHP also gives us some amazing tools for handling one of the biggest headaches in programming: null values. The null coalescing operator, that double question mark, is such a clean way to set a default value. Instead of some clunky if statement, you just say variable, question mark, default, done. And the null safe operator? Whoa, this thing is a lifesaver. If you're trying to use an object that might be null, this little operator prevents a crash by just stopping. It's a total game changer for writing code that doesn't break easily.
So, what's the big takeaway here? It's simple. Conditionals are where your application's intelligence starts. They're the decision makers. They're what happens next.
Okay, let's move on to pillar number 2. So our code can make a decision. That's great, but a lot of the time, we need it to do something over and over and over again, and that is where loops come in to do all the heavy lifting for us.
And PHP has a loop for pretty much any situation. A for loop? That's your go-to when you know exactly how many times you need to repeat something. A while loop is what you use when you just need to keep going as long as a condition is true. The do-while loop is a small variation that just makes sure the code runs at least once. And for arrays, Foreach is your absolute best friend. It is hands down the cleanest, easiest way to work through every single item in a collection.
And you're not just stuck inside a loop until it's done. You've got controls. Break is like hitting the emergency brake. It gets you out of the loop immediately. Continue is more like a skip button for the current item. It just moves on to the next one. And then there's exit. If something goes really wrong, exit will stop the entire script dead in its tracks.
So when you boil it all down, what are loops really for? They're the workhorses. They are all about efficiency, about automating all those repetitive tasks so you can get a ton of work done with just a little bit of code. Okay, so our code can make decisions, and it can repeat actions. But what happens when you need to do the same combination of things in like 10 different places? Just copying and pasting code is an absolute nightmare. And that brings us to our third and final pillar: functions.
Think of functions as named, reusable recipes for your code. You write the recipe once, and then you can just call it by name whenever you need it. It starts with the function keyword. You give it a unique name, and you can feed it ingredients through what we call parameters. The actual recipe, the logic, lives inside the curly braces. And if you want, it can give you a result back using the return keyword.
Now this next bit is super important to understand. By default, when you give a variable to a function, PHP sends a copy. This is called pass-by value, and it's a safety thing, right? It means the function can't accidentally mess up your original data. But what if you want it to? Well, then you can pass it by reference by just adding that little ampersand symbol. That gives the function a direct line to the original variable, letting it make changes.
And modern PHP has some really nice features to make your functions even more flexible. You can give parameters default values, which makes them optional. You can use those 3 little dots, we call it the splat operator, to create a variadic function that can take in any number of arguments. And since PHP 8, we have named arguments, which makes your code so much more readable and lets you skip optional parameters without any fuss. It's awesome.
Sometimes you just need a quick, throwaway function for a single task. That's where anonymous functions, or closures, come into play. They don't have a name, you just use them when you need them, often as quick helpers. And they have this neat trick where they can use variables from the environment they were created in, thanks to the use keyword.
And now for a concept that's a bit more advanced, but really powerful. Recursion. This is when a function calls itself. I know, it sounds a little weird, but think of it like those Russian nesting dolls. Each doll contains a smaller, identical version of itself. Recursion is perfect for problems that can be broken down into smaller pieces of the exact same problem, like navigating a file system.
So why do we care so much about functions? Because they are the absolute backbone of good software. They help you stop repeating yourself, they keep your logic organized, and they make it possible to build applications that are way easier to test and maintain in the long run.
So when you step back and look at the big picture, you see how it all fits together, right? Conditionals are for making decisions. Loops are for repeating those decisions, and functions are for packaging up those decisions so you can reuse them.
Getting a solid handle on these three concepts is, well, it's everything. They are the fundamental building blocks you will use in every single program you ever write, no matter how big or small.
So now that we know how to build logic inside our application, it's time to start talking to the world outside of it. In our next explainer, we're going to get into how PHP can read and write files and handle all sorts of common data formats.
Be sure to continue on to our next explainer on PHP file handling. This is Developer Roadmaps. Map your path, build your career.